Growing up, I spent most of my childhood wandering through forests near my home, and the older I got, the more I wanted to turn my love for nature into a job. So, when I got the chance to become a park ranger, I took it without a second thought. The idea of spending my days protecting the land, ensuring the safety of visitors, and watching over the animals that called it home filled me with excitement. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened during my first week on the job. I was still new, learning the ropes under the guidance of a seasoned ranger named Bill. Bill had been working in this park for over 20 years, and he knew every trail, every tree. He walked with the confidence of someone who had spent more time in the woods than out of them. He rarely talked unless he had something important to say, which I respected. He taught by showing, not explaining, and I tried my best to keep up. That day, Bill and I were doing a routine patrol through one of the more remote parts of the park. It was late afternoon. The trail we were on was narrow and wound through thick clusters of trees, some so dense that you couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. As we hiked, Bill pointed out different plants, animal tracks, and subtle signs of the forest's health. He mentioned things like tree decay, types of moss that grew in certain areas, and how to tell if deer had recently passed through. I tried to absorb it all, but it was a lot to take in. My head was full of new information, but I felt like I was getting the hang of it, slowly but surely. Then, something strange happened. We had just crested a small hill when Bill suddenly stopped in his tracks. I nearly bumped into him. I followed his gaze and saw that he was looking at a distant tree line, maybe 200 or 300 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything. It was just trees and shadows. But then, something shifted, just on the edge of my vision. There, standing perfectly still, was a figure. A silhouette, dark against the fading light, barely visible through the trees. It was big, and its outline was hard to make out. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, staring in our direction. We had seen signs of bears in the area earlier that day, claw marks on a tree, disturbed patches of earth. But this wasn't a bear. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too upright. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing added up. The figure was just too still, too purposeful. I glanced over at Bill, expecting him to do something, to say something, but he remained frozen, eyes fixed on the figure. His face was unreadable, but I could tell that he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't something normal. This wasn't something we could explain away. The figure continued to stand there motionless, and the longer we watched, the more uneasy I felt. There was something about the way it just stared at us, like it knew we were there, but it wasn't scared. In fact, it felt like it was studying us. It didn't feel like the way an animal watches a human. It felt different. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds. It was hard to tell, and my breath had gone shallow. I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I just kept staring at the figure, waiting for it to move, to disappear, to do anything. But it didn't. It just stood there, completely unfazed. Eventually, Bill turned to me and motioned for us to keep walking. I was reluctant to take my eyes off the figure, but I trusted Bill. Slowly, we backed away, putting more distance between us and the thing in the trees. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting it to follow us, but it never moved. Bill led the way in silence, and I followed, my mind buzzing with questions I didn't know how to ask. What had we seen? Was it real? Part of me wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but I knew it wasn't. Bill had seen it too. And the fact that he hadn't said anything, that he hadn't tried to explain it away, made me think that maybe this wasn't the first time he had encountered something like this. I could feel the weight of what we had witnessed pressing down on me, but I didn't know how to bring it up. Instead, I went through the motions of finishing up our patrol, checking off tasks, and making notes in the logbook. Bill did the same, his face as unreadable as ever. Later that night, as I lay in my bunk, staring up at the ceiling of the small cabin I shared with the other rangers, I couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind. Its size, its stillness, the way it had just watched us. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. All I knew was that the forest I had always loved, the place I had felt so comfortable in, suddenly seemed a little less familiar and a lot more mysterious. I never asked Bill about that day, and he never offered an explanation. But from that moment on, I couldn't help but wonder what else was out there, hidden in the trees, watching from the shadows. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. All I knew for sure was that the woods held secrets, and I had just stumbled across one of them. I grew up in a small village nestled in the shadow of Mount Tsurugi. It was a quiet place where the mountains towered over us, their peaks often shrouded in mist. The village was old, with homes built from wood and stone, their foundations set firmly in the earth. Life was simple here, but the stories were not. For as long as I could remember, there had been tales of the Yamakachi, a legendary snake said to dwell deep within the forests of Mount Tsurugi. The Yamakachi was no ordinary snake. It was a giant, larger than any creature I had ever imagined. The villagers said it was as long as 10 meters, with scales black as night and a stomach as pale as snow. It was a creature of both fear and mystery, one that haunted the dreams of the old and the young alike. People rarely spoke about it openly, but when they did, it was always with hushed voices and wide eyes. Some claimed to have seen it. Others believed it was just a myth, a story told to keep children from wandering too far into the forest. But no one ever ventured into the woods unarmed. I first heard about the Yamakachi when I was a child. My grandmother would tell me stories of how it slithered through the trees, its massive body moving silently through the underbrush. She said the snake was as old as the mountain itself, a guardian of the forest that only appeared when the balance of nature was disturbed. The villagers would leave offerings at the edge of the woods, small gifts of food, trinkets, and prayers, in the hopes of keeping the Yamakachi at peace. Whether out of fear or respect, I never knew for sure, but I did know that the forest felt different, heavier, when I wandered too close to the mountain. In the early mornings, before the sun had fully risen, the mist would roll down from the mountain like a blanket, wrapping the village in its cool embrace. On those mornings, I would often find myself staring at Mount Tsurugi, wondering if the Yamakachi was watching us from the shadows of the trees. The villagers believed it stayed hidden, deep in the heart of the mountain where few dared to venture. But every now and then, someone would claim to have seen it. The most famous sighting happened on May 26, 1973. A worker from the village who had been repairing a trail near the mountain came back with a story that shook the entire community. He said he had seen the Yamakachi. According to him, the snake had been coiled around a tree, its black body blending in with the shadows, only its pale belly visible as it stretched out in the sunlight. He claimed it was longer than a car, maybe even two, and its eyes were like dark pools of water, reflecting the world around it. The snake had moved so quietly that he hadn't even noticed it at first. After his report, more sightings followed. Hikers and campers who ventured too close to Mount Tsurugi started returning with similar stories. They spoke of a massive snake that moved through the forest like a ghost, its body leaving no trace on the forest floor. Despite the fear, the villagers never abandoned the mountain. Mount Tsurugi was sacred to us, its forests providing food, wood, and water. But we were always cautious. Those who worked near the mountain carried weapons. Long sticks, knives, even bows and arrows, just in case they encountered the Yamakasi. No one wanted to fight it, but everyone wanted to be prepared. As I grew older, the stories of the Yamakasi became more distant, like echoes from the past. The sightings slowed, and fewer people spoke of it. But the mountain never lost its sense of mystery. Every time I ventured into the forest, I felt its presence, as if the Yamakasi was watching, waiting. The trees seemed taller there, the shadows deeper. The air was thicker, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. It was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. I remember the last time I went to the mountain. I had hiked halfway up the trail when I stopped to rest by a stream. The water was cool, rushing over smooth stones, and the forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. I sat there for a while, letting the sounds of nature wash over me. That's when I felt it. A shift in the air, a presence. I didn't see the Yamakasi, but I knew it was there, somewhere in the shadows, watching. I slowly stood, backing away from the stream. I didn't run, but I walked quickly, never looking back. I never returned to Mount Tsurugi after that. The forest, the mountain, and the Yamakasi had become a part of me, a part of my history. Whether the Yamakasi was real or just a legend, I couldn't say for sure. But I knew that something lived in those woods, something ancient and powerful. There's a small park in the state of Illinois that hides a world of natural wonders most people wouldn't expect. This park, with its hidden canyons, caves, and waterfalls, seems out of place among the surrounding flatlands and forests. While not very large, it draws many visitors during the summer. There are campsites and cabins that are often booked months in advance, making it a popular destination for outdoor lovers. I spent 6 years working as a park ranger here. Over that time, I learned that the park has a long history, much of it shrouded in mystery. It began with conflicts between Native American tribes in the area, but I won't dive into that part of the history here. However, strange events have been happening in the park ever since. Some believe these events are the work of spirits from the past, and while I can't say for sure, I do know there's something unusual about the place. Over the years, we received all kinds of odd reports from visitors. Some mentioned animals causing damage to their campsites, while others said their tents had been unzipped at night or objects mysteriously moved. In one instance, a guest found rocks from their fire pit arranged in a circle around their tent. The fire had been extinguished the night before, so those rocks would have been too hot to handle. Yet somehow, they had been placed in a neat circle. Guests staying in the park's cabins often complained of hearing strange noises. Some said they heard knocking at their doors or scraping sounds on the walls, and others reported tapping on the windows at night. While these occurrences were strange, they didn't seem harmful, and no one was ever hurt. However, if anything was left outside, it was often moved by morning. Things became even stranger when people began reporting odd sightings in the park's canyons. The park is home to several box canyons, which are areas where you must hike in and then turn around to leave. Many of these canyons have waterfalls, and at the bottom of the canyons are beautiful pools of water. The pools are a stunning bluish-green color, but they aren't safe to swim in. From time to time, visitors would claim they saw something strange in the water. Some even reported hearing voices, calling them into the pools. What was even stranger was that the voices often sounded like people they knew, even though no one was around. These reports only came in a few times each year, but they happened consistently. Most of the reports came from the same few spots in the park. One summer, however, things escalated. It was an unusually hot season with very little rain, and the pools were shrinking. We started getting more and more reports from hikers saying they had seen or heard something unusual in the canyons. Most of the reports were vague. People didn't want to sound crazy, so they'd simply say they noticed something odd on the trail or in the canyon. After about the fifth report that summer, I decided to look into it. I gathered all the reports from the last decade and plotted them on a map. To my surprise, I found that the sightings were all near caves scattered throughout the park. There's a cave system in the park, but it hasn't been fully explored, at least not in recent years. Looking at the map, I wondered if the caves were connected underground. One canyon in particular stood out. It had more reports than any other spot, and near it were 3 large caves. I decided to check it out for myself. One day I made an excuse to go to that area, parked my truck at the trailhead, and hiked about 6 miles into the canyon. When I arrived, I noticed something odd. There were fish bones scattered around the pool at the end of the canyon. I didn't think fish could survive in such an environment, which made the discovery even stranger. I wanted to explore the caves, so I brought along a flashlight, a headlamp, and a rope to tie outside the cave entrance in case I got lost. I entered the largest cave and walked for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few minutes. The cave was dark and eerie, and I soon heard something move in the distance. When I shone my light in the direction of the sound, I saw what looked like a massive nest. It was large enough to fit a person and was lined with fresh leaves and grass. Scattered around the nest were bones. There were no animals in the area that could have made something like that. I decided it was time to leave, but when I pulled on my rope to guide me back to the entrance, it was slack. I kept pulling, but it never tightened. My rope had been untied, and I was alone. I did my best to stay calm and retraced my steps out of the cave. When I finally made it outside, I saw no sign of what had released the rope, but something had clearly untied it. Let me tell you about the one and only time I went to Crescent Lake. I never believed in anything strange or spooky, but this experience still makes me wonder. I was in a small town for work, attending a boring business meeting. After a few days of sitting in stuffy rooms, I needed some fresh air. My coworker Lucy loves hiking and exploring nature. She suggested we go to Crescent Lake, a quiet spot known for its beauty and peace. I wasn't really into the idea, but I agreed. We rented a car and planned to go in the afternoon when we had some free time. Crescent Lake is a large, calm lake with crystal clear water. We arrived as the sun was starting to dip in the sky. The plan was simple: take a walk and maybe rent a small boat if we felt like it. Lucy was thrilled, talking about how she used to camp with her family. I just enjoyed being out of the hotel. As we walked along the shore, the day was slowly ending. It was quiet, with only the sound of water splashing now and then. Lucy was a bit ahead of me, trying to find the best spot to watch the sunset. That's when I saw something that sent shivers down my spine. By the water, just behind some tall grass, I noticed 2 bright green eyes. They glowed in a way I'd never seen before. I'm not a nature expert, but I know what animals like raccoons or deer look like. These eyes were different, too big, too intense. At first, I thought maybe it was someone with a flashlight or a prank. But then, whatever it was, came out from the bushes. It was huge, with a slim but strong body. Its skin was covered in strange, shiny scales that reflected the dim light of the sunset. The creature's head looked like a mix between a lizard and a bird, with a long snout and a sharp jawline. But what really freaked me out were those glowing eyes. They didn't look away from me. I froze. I wanted to yell for Lucy, but I couldn't. The creature tilted its head as if it was curious. Then, it took a slow step toward me. That's when I finally snapped out of my shock. I turned and ran toward Lucy, my heart pounding. When I reached her, I could hardly speak. I was out of breath and scared out of my mind. Lucy looked at me like I was acting crazy, telling me I probably needed some water and rest, but I knew what I had seen. I couldn't shake the image of those eyes. We quickly decided to head back to the car. Lucy kept trying to joke around and cheer me up, but I wasn't listening. I felt like the shadows around us were growing, as if the forest itself was watching. Every little noise made me jump. By the time we reached the car, I was shaking. I fumbled with the keys, desperate to lock the doors and get out of there. Lucy asked if I was okay, but I just nodded. I didn't want to explain because I knew it would sound insane. The drive back was mostly silent. Lucy tried to talk a few times, but I wasn't in the mood. I couldn't stop thinking about the creature, the way it moved, those eyes. It was all too real to be a trick or a costume. When we got back to the hotel, I rushed to my room, trying to calm down. I sat on the bed thinking about what had happened. I grabbed my phone and started searching for any clue about what I saw. I looked up local animals, legends, anything that could explain it, but nothing matched. I had always heard tales of jinns growing up. My grandmother would tell me stories about how they lived in a world just beside ours, invisible yet always present. They could shapeshift into animals or vanish in the wind, their powers vast and unpredictable. As a child, I'd listen in awe, imagining these creatures floating in the air around us, hidden in the shadows of the trees or the dusty corners of old rooms. I never thought that one day I would encounter one myself. It was a summer evening when it happened. I was wandering the outskirts of a small town, not far from the desert. The sun was low and a warm breeze brushed against my face. I was searching for something, though I didn't know what exactly. Perhaps a bit of adventure, or maybe just a change from the monotony of everyday life. As I walked, I came across a small, abandoned building, its walls cracked and weathered by time. The roof had collapsed in some places, allowing the sky to peek through the broken beams. It looked like it had been untouched for years, maybe even decades. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, drawn by a sense of curiosity I couldn't quite explain. The interior was cool and dim, with dust swirling lazily in the air. The walls were bare except for faint traces of old, faded paintings that had once adorned them. There was nothing remarkable about the place, but I felt a strange energy in the room, like the air was thicker, more alive. As I explored further, I noticed something glinting in a corner, half buried beneath the rubble. It was a small brass oil lamp, the kind you might see in the stories of the 1001 Nights. It was tarnished, and the metal was worn smooth from age, but there was something about it that caught my attention. Without thinking, I picked it up, brushing away the dust that had settled over it. The moment I touched it, a strange sensation rushed through me, as though a current of energy had passed from the lamp into my body. I felt a deep rumble in the earth beneath me, and the air around me seemed to shift, growing warmer and more charged. A gust of wind swirled through the broken windows, whipping up the dust in a frenzied dance. It was then that I realized what was happening. The stories my grandmother had told me flashed through my mind, and a shiver ran down my spine. This was no ordinary lamp. I had disturbed something ancient, something powerful. I didn't see the jinn at first. It was like the air itself began to twist and ripple, forming a shape that gradually solidified in front of me. It wasn't monstrous or terrifying, as I had imagined jinns might be. Instead, it was more like a shadow, flickering and shifting, always just on the edge of my vision. Its form was fluid, never fully taking shape, but I could feel its presence, heavy and imposing. There was an overwhelming sense of power in the air, as though the very space around me was bending to the jinn's will. I felt small and insignificant in its presence, like a leaf caught in a strong wind. Yet, despite its fearsome energy, The jinn did not feel malevolent. It was ancient, yes, but there was wisdom in its aura, as though it had seen countless lifetimes pass by. The wind grew stronger, swirling around us, and for a moment, I was sure I would be swept away. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the wind died down, leaving the air eerily still once more. The jinn was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. But something had changed. The energy in the room had shifted, becoming calmer, quieter. I could still feel the jinn's presence, faint but lingering, like a memory that refuses to fade. I left the building that evening with a sense of awe and wonder. I had encountered something beyond the ordinary, something that defied logic and reason. The lamp, now cool and lifeless in my hand, felt heavier than before, as though it carried with it the weight of ancient secrets.